A child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. What is an example of this that you've seen or experienced firsthand? Kid went to school. He was in special behavioral classes and then was put into our class in 4th grade. My teacher was hard on him. One day, the kid had a tantrum and threw a chair. He was sent back to the special classes, which probably destroyed him. He continued on and in high school was one of the freaks. Always wore a trench coat in Texas. Mind you, was into nerdy things. I talked to him sometimes, but wouldn't really call him a friend. More just nice to him. He would be reading a raid book and we'd chat about that being my uncle got me into RPGs. In 11th grade, school went into lockdown for some unknown reason. Found out he committed suicide in one of the school bathrooms. Heard he wrote letters to faculty and friends prior to doing it. I work with kids who have mental health issues. Many of them have attempted suicide, ran away, self-harm, or have an addiction of some kind by their mid-teens. They always have some kind of traumatic family life that's pushed them to that problem. One thing we see again and again is the poor kid who comes in after the parent guardian has belittled them and told them what a piece of garbage they are for years. Eventually the kid starts acting out, which the adult uses as proof that she was right all along about the kid being an awful piece of it. One kid I worked with was in and out of treatment programs for a couple of years and had exactly this kind of parents. Father was always on the road driving a truck and checked out when he was at home. Mom was personality disordered and extremely emotionally and verbally abusive. One day, while his father was on the road, this boy murdered his mother by bludgeoning her to death with a hammer while she slept in. Then he kept her body in the house for a few days, abusing the corpse before stuffing her remains into the trash can and leaving them on the curbside for pickup. I used to be into amateur radio after a short stint in the Army Cadets. There was one guy in the East Midlands, UK, who was one of the adult instructors. He was always telling us about amateur radio and would hand out old cheaper pieces of tech he'd tried out and wasn't keeping. Anyway, he was a little weird, overly friendly with adults, never had any bad vibes around the kids, and obviously had some social anxiety which he was compensating for. Personally, I suspect he was on the autistic spectrum, but who knows. After I left the cadets and went to uni, I stayed in touch on Facebook. We were in the same Facebook group for amateur radio hobbyists. He always liked to do things by the book and instilled in us the importance of being responsible and socially conscious with our radio use. He was the same on Facebook, reminding people that Mrs. Miggins on her UQ 10 handset wouldn't know about transmission power and squelch, etc. He mentioned in passing to a new member the importance of only using the public and licensed channels, kind of like CB radio in the US, on the correct, very low power setting of half a watt. He mentioned it was because Mrs. Miggins trying to reach her kid in the next street wouldn't understand the idea that she could hear you but couldn't reach you to ask you to be quiet a minute. He was correct here, and it's also a criminal offense to transmit at higher power on these frequencies, even though it's not enforced. Anyway, this got someone's back up, and he was kicked from the group for preaching. After unsuccessfully asking to be let back in, he set up a larger antenna in his back garden, set up a super fancy aerial atop it, with a 30-watt transmission system. This is really quite powerful. He now turns this on for several hours a day on whatever channels the radio club group are using to teach them the importance of good etiquette. This means that nobody can use certain frequencies for hours at a time, as it just sounds like someone is having a one-way conversation on air. He could probably get arrested, but that doesn't seem to bother him at all. I once attended a birthday party with a bouncy castle. The birthday kid and their friends kicked a younger sibling and his friend out, so they unplugged it and watched everyone's dismay as it deflated. Way to go, Mason. Baddest moves for a 12-year-old. Saw this happen with my lit brother. He has autism, and even though he was diagnosed around the age of 8, a lot of people didn't know how to deal with him, or didn't want to take the effort to learn how to deal with him. This includes teachers, other children's parents, and even one of our grandmothers. What made it even worse is that I was the child prodigy who would get nothing but amazing grades and started getting into art at a very young age and being really good at it. I got all the praise had he basically got nothing. My parents didn't do this on purpose. I would steal the spotlight. So he just started getting in trouble just so he would get any attention. He started fires, vandalized stuff, and even from a young age he would go to the main road to throw rocks at cars and such. If he didn't get caught, he would tell my parents what he did himself. There's actually a video of him at my birthday where he told our mom he wanted to show her something, only to flip over a very large container of laundry detergent when she arrived with the camera. He's 25 now, and thankfully he has a really nice girlfriend that actually helps him get over the whole negative attention is also attention thing. My brother. My family wasn't loving. I coped with my venturing out and exploring on my own. I would leaving early each day and explore nature, only coming home for food. My brother coped with the lack of love with sex, drugs, fighting, parties, and theft. He had a super distorted view of needing love, and he really acted like if he wasn't getting love, then the world deserved to burn. He went into prison in his teens. He got out in his 20s. Tried to be good for a year, but couldn't find his concept of love, so he started burning the village again. Went back in. Got out years later. Tried to go clean, and this time found love. But he pushed himself too hard to be lovable. He developed a super personality built on meth. He did drugs to keep up, lost his love, and started to burn the village down again. The last time, the local sheriffs ended the cycle. He wasn't going back in. During the road chase, they filled his windshield with bullets and he veered off a cliff and died in the dirt. It was the headline of the local news. I think I may forever compare my life to my brother's. How could we be so different? We had the same parents and endured very similar pains. But I didn't choose to burn down the village. I chose to distance myself and survive. He went nuclear. The village didn't have a chance. I did this to my last job as a rehab tech in a nursing home. I was treated poorly after a couple of months. My workload was literally doubled and I was never listened to about my concerns. I begged them to hire a second tech, even part-time, just so I can breathe and have my mental state not be ruined. They always told me no and then piled on more work, got mad at me when patients weren't complying, ran me around like a dog for hours, cut my lunch hour for no reason, and refused to give me any sort of pay raise when minimum wage went up. I was at my wit's end and everyone but my manager and the therapists could see it. I also experienced a privacy violation that I wish I reported to HR. I was basically forced to tell my manager why I needed to take a day off and for what the medical procedure I was getting was for. Another instance, I was told I was also clearly gaining weight by one of the therapists and my manager, and then they laughed about it. I was so pissed off that I put in my 2 weeks, but I could barely make it past 2 more days. After one god-awful busy morning, I packed up my stuff during my break, clocked out, and went home. I sent a text to my manager saying I won't be coming back and I blocked her. I felt bad doing it, but I had nurses and aides telling me to quit BC. They saw how miserable I was. About a week or so later they went into lockdown BC of COVID. I'm burning down my community right now. That is, my neighbors are ducking with me, trying to weaponize the bylaws of our HOA to construct a spiteful road on my property for their driveway. Fire safety they call it. $25,000 in unnecessary legal expenses, I call it. So I'll let my HOA know that if they allow this, don't stand up forcefully for me in court. Then I will use that same power to demand a 60 feet road down the entire HOA, literally forcing neighbors I don't know to move their homes. I am being treated poorly, feel unwelcome in my new village, so I am enforcing my rights and burning down the neighborhood. It will cost 25 landowners $1 million to make up for ducking with me. Some may literally lose their homes, and afterwards their property values will be much lower. But I told them what would happen if they did not support me. Gave them a chance. I go a police call to go by a school. I arrived and I see a teacher holding a small kid back and the other kid who looked like he just got hit by a bus. His arm looked backwards. His face was bloodied. He had hair ripped out. Was on the floor as paramedics took him to the ambulance. I arrested the kid while I had to question him, he said, and I quote, "I want to be noticed." It haunted me as I sent out a report to do a background check on the parents. Turns out the kid was being neglected and at school teachers reported that others would push past him and shove him and not even notice him. He was smiling as he then said, "People finally looked at me. It's been so long since that I felt horrible as I passed the case to a different person as I couldn't handle it. I'm not sure it applies here, but that's the first thing that came to mind when I saw this." Does anyone know the actual story of King Shaka Zulu? He was literally that guy. Shaka was born as an illegitimate son of a Zulu and was thus rejected by the Zulu settlements. He spent his childhood growing up in his mother's settlements and was then lent an army, which he used to take over the Zulu tribe. One of the greatest, but most intense, African warriors and monarchs of all time. I'm a behavioral interventionist at a middle school. My job is technically to pull disruptive students out of class, get them redirected, then back into their classroom. Most of my job is actually a sounding board and an understanding ear to kids who struggle. My entire job is an example of that quote. The neglect and abuse of some of those kids will break your heart. Any school shooting tragedy? Well, Hitler wasn't a popular boy for sure. Same with Ceausescu. Friendless his entire life. Stalin was beaten by his father. And it goes on and on. I went to school with a kid who seemed a little disturbed. Maybe it's just my bias, but he definitely seemed like the school shooter type. Well, no one liked this kid and constantly picked on him. Once in some random class in 7th grade I asked him if he wanted to be my partner for some dumb little assignment. We chatted in class for the rest of the year. Toward the end of high school he told me I kept him from some bad it by being his best friend. I literally only talked to him in class for a few months, and by that point hadn't talked to him in years. Embrace everyone, folks. You never know whether it might change someone's life. Any number of multiple murderers, arsonists, suicide bombers, etc. As a society we're just in love with abandonment. So we abandon our most vulnerable every chance we get. Instead of providing an environment in which everyone can flourish, we focus on degrading and reducing each other so that we can lie to ourselves that we are the best because we're least itty. It doesn't stop us from being itty or from turning the world to it. One of my best friends in high school had a few really crappy boyfriends. She is very bright, excelled on the debate team, and is really attractive. But her mom was a serious alcoholic and was always getting into new relationships and then breaking up, which I think passed some attachment issues onto my friend. When we were seniors, she was talking about all the losers she'd dated, been mistreated by, and how none of them were going anywhere in life. She said something to the effect of, "I'd love to be there when they inevitably get locked up for drugs or domestic abuse, or both." She got a law degree, moved back to our town, and is now the county prosecutor. I think we can find this dynamic in most cases of most criminals. I knew a girl a few years back who I think is a decent example of this. She was diagnosed with AD back in primary school and was shunned by her whole family because of it. As a result she had low self-esteem and slowly grew a profound hatred for people, which resulted in everyone at school hating her, and as a result her hatred grew more. After her 17th birthday she ran away, but before she did she had spent about 5 years gathering dirt on everyone who wronged her. She released it all, which resulted in her parents splitting and a bunch of other kids being expelled or getting into it with their parents, and if memory serves me correctly one kid even got disowned because of what everyone found out about him. She ended up running up to a family friend of mine and is still working on rebuilding her life. It's a shame because she is one of the nicest people I know and is a very honest person. Everyone just treated her like crap, so she burned it all. XX trigger warning. Suicide. When contemplating suicide I have thought it's the only way my family will ever truly appreciate me and love me. When people die is when families mostly regret not caring or being in the person's life as much as they should have. If dying is the only way to feel that warmth I've wanted for so long, then it's worth it. I don't know if it 100% fits, but I will share anyway. There's this one kid I went to high school with. He was incredibly sheltered by his parents to the point where he couldn't even leave his driveway or even watch most shows on the Disney Channel. All of a sudden his parents have a change of heart and give him a lot more freedom. Well, he gets involved with the wrong people online and ends up a neo-Nazi. Let this be a lesson in why you shouldn't shelter your kids. You could apply this to many minority groups that become insurgencies. This reminds me of another quote by JFK. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. Wife joined a therapy office that had existed for 4 years. She worked for 2 years doing basically everything. Think payroll and a lot of paperwork that ended up taking over 10 to 15 hours weekly that she didn't get paid for. She had been made equal partner after 1 year. She was never appreciated this whole time. After several final straws, she started her own office with 2 others and ran the other asshole out of town in 6 months. 2 years and she now makes more money with half the work. I haven't experienced anything, but I saw this especially with this kid I went to school with. I wasn't great friends with him, but we were kinda like school friends, I guess. He came into school one day with a red face and he just looked really tired and like he was crying. So being a good person, I asked him what's wrong in class, and he said he'd tell me at lunch. When lunch came around, he had told me that he had fought with his parents all night about his grades. But keep in mind, he also worked all week and only had Sundays off because his parents didn't support him financially at all. I told him not to worry about it, and that he is more than just his grades. But he kept telling me that to his parents he was probably just a failure. I was honestly really concerned about it, because he seemed legitimately depressed and such. Of course, I texted him later that night to try and make sure everything was okay. However, a few months ago, I learned he moved out of his house at 18 and told his parents he didn't need their financial support and that he was independent. And apparently, his parents felt terrible and felt they had failed. That's all I know so far.